not going to meet our HMP numbers ever.
We need a change in the Clean Air Act. That's
No matter what we do,
period, because the feds are not doing their part.
Okay, here we go.
between our climate and geography, everything's electric. Will I ever get there? It's those two things.
Good afternoon.
I finally got them to do it.
Today is Thursday, September 7th, 2023. Prior to me calling the meeting to order, I'd like to ask members who are calling in by phone to please identify themselves. As a reminder, if a member of this body is attending remotely but is not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public, but may not participate in any member discussion or voting of this body. Meeting of the Regional Council is now called to order. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Mr. President, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. We are holding this meeting in compliance with the Brown Act rules relating to telephonic and video conference meetings. The SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Instructions providing public comment are provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. And just as a reminder to reduce background noise, please ensure that your microphone is muted when not in use. This is the time for public comment received. I'm sorry, public comments received prior to meetings and comments not on for matters of the agenda. Do we have any
We don't have any public comment speaker cards.
Okay. I will now open the public comment period of the meeting. This is time for members of the public to offer comments for matters that are within SCAG's jurisdiction but are not listed on the agenda. Okay. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
No public comment cards received,
Okay.
Mr. President.
I will now close the public comment period for matters not on the agenda. Do we have any need to review and prioritize agenda items? Seeing none. We'll go to action items. Number 1, draft or RENA reform recommendations. Do we have any members of the public wish to speak on this item?
We have one raised hand by John Mears.
Okay. Nope.
Pushing that. There we go.
There we go.
These are the comments I wanted to make at the last meeting. First of all, I want to thank staff for their hard work. Dealing with the issue of RENA reform is a tricky one, and especially thanks to Mayanne for this. My comments were on the letter that we're going to send regarding RENA reform. I think many of us feel that the system is broken, and the draft letter perhaps needs to be a bit stronger to reflect our frustration and disappointment with the RENA process itself, as well as the so-called reform procedure, which sadly was secretive, untransparent, and biased. One specific point is that we wanted to try to, and actually the CHD committee recommended accountability and figuring out a way to get accountability from HCD when it comes to their decision making. And so we recommended the ability for us or for SCAG or for any interested party to avail themselves of the legal system to challenge arbitrary, capricious decisions and figures that may be incorrect. For example, double counting, which the legislative, which the state audit found, the scathing state audit found that HCD had double counted. Currently in the letter, it talks about due process. And due process is itself perhaps a bit fuzzy. I think we need to clarify that the current system does not allow due process, but someone in theory could say HCD does their own internal review. Well, that's not what our recommendation meant. Our recommendation meant that we should have some sort of recourse. So I urge this regional council to clarify in the letter that when we talk about due process, we mean due process within our legal and our court system. Because otherwise you have a situation where itself, HCD could claim internal review and their judge, jury, and executioner. And we felt that was a problem considering many of the problems we had. Aside from that, I'd like to thank everybody and thank you for listening to my thoughts. Thank you.
We'll go back to the clerk. There were a couple of public comments we received.
Mr. President, I do want to announce that we did receive 2 public comments, which have been posted on the website as well as transmitted to members. Additionally, we did receive 1 more public comment this morning after the deadline, and that will be posted on our website and transmitted to members.
Thank you. I'll now call on Ian Johnson, Department Manager, to provide a presentation.
Let me introduce Mayan a little bit with some comments. First of all, I want to take a moment to thank the members of the CHD committee and chair and the chair for accommodating us on this special meeting to deal with this. And it was a very robust conversation we had of cycle last month. Chair Yama actually reminded me that we were not dark in August because we actually had a CHD meeting in August as a result of this RENA conversation. Many of you have followed the RENA process, and there are many who probably would stay away from it because it's such a volatile issue to talk about. RENA has sort of evolved with us every single cycle, and specifically the 6th cycle was uniquely different in terms of the requirements that came with the various housing laws that passed. I think well over a couple hundred housing laws went through the system in the last 3 years, and we were affected by many of those in the 6th cycle. And we feel like we made the best of it in the region under the leadership of the Regional Council and members of the RENA subcommittee as well as CHD committee. Such that the 6th cycle was significant in helping our region in achieving other regional goals like GHG reduction and through land use planning, increasing access to fair housing as required under both federal and state laws, and also promoting equity and sustainability in some measure. We heard a lot from our elected officials, jurisdictions, and stakeholders during and after the 6th cycle process about how we can improve this process. And this is a culmination of all of that conversation we've been having and the inputs that we've been having over time. The RENA itself is not just about a number. I know we can get fixated on the number, and number is important. A RENA allocation is a representation of the jurisdiction's existing and future housing need, but there is also a regional emphasis to it. The issues that we work on cross-jurisdictional for us, and as discussed earlier on today, you saw in the previewing of the 2024 Connect SoCal that we are needed together as one region, and so these issues are cross-functional, cross-jurisdictional. The draft recommendations that you will be discussing today, taking actions on today, were developed with stakeholder input and also aligned with regional goals in mind. They were refined further by the CHD in committee at their special August meeting. The report in your agenda package represents a regional effort to meet our regional needs, and we want to take your approved RENA reform recommendations to HCD to make sure that our voices are heard in their concurring process. But I also want to add that the work on RENA reform is not just about this letter. As we intoned during the CHD conversation and earlier on at the LCMC meeting, there will be other policy discussions that will come forward that we will probably need to take action on as we'll be looking to the Regional Council to lead on as a result of further conversation on what policies and policy levers we need to pull in Sacramento on RENA. So with that, I want to introduce Mayan Johnson, Department Manager for Housing here at SCAG. Mayan is a veteran of multiple RENA cycles, and I'm always pleased that she's still smiling and still wanting to work on RENA.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kome. Sometimes you can't help but laugh. So I'm here today and my colleagues as well to present on the draft RENA reform recommendations. This was a process that started last year to be in concurrence with the statewide RENA reform efforts. So today's action is to approve the staff is recommended to approve the staff recommendations on RENA reform as noted in your staff report. There's 14 of them, and authorize the executive director to submit a comment letter on behalf of SCAG to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. We do have to note the reason we've kind of rushed into a special meeting last month with CHD, and why we're bringing it today is because HCD's concurrent comment period ends on September 15th. So we do want to make sure, as Kome noted, our voices are heard at the state level on what we recommend for RENA reform. So for today's agenda, for those who are uninitiated in the RENA process, today is your initiation into that right. So we'll have a background on RENA 101 and then a background of the RENA reform process. And then we'll go into the engagement process, how we develop these draft recommendations, and then we'll then present and talk about our draft recommendations and the next steps. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, David Kyobe, who will be going over RENA 101.
Good afternoon, Regional Council. My name is David Kyobe. I'm a Senior Regional Planner with the Housing Department. So getting into RENA. RENA is a state housing law requirement to determine existing and projected housing need. And the process for developing this is led by the Council of Governments, such as SCAG, and it happens every 8 years. Jurisdictions must plan for their RENA allocation in their housing elements by ensuring there are enough sites and zoning to accommodate their RENA allocation. So this is an overview of the last few RENA cycles. So HCD provides a regional termination in consultation with SCAG and the Department of Finance. So for the fourth cycle, this was just under 700,000 units. The fifth cycle, this was just over 400,000. And then in our latest cycle, the sixth cycle, this jumped to 1.3 million units for the SCAG region. So RENA has 5 core objectives. The first is to increase housing supply and mix of housing types, tenure, and affordability within each region in an equitable manner, promoting infill development and socioeconomic equity, the protection of environmental and agricultural resources, and the encouragement of efficient development patterns, promoting an improved interregional jobs and housing relationship, and allocating a lower proportion of housing need and income categories in jurisdictions that have a disproportionately high share in comparison to the county distribution. And finally, affirmatively furthering fair housing. And this slide just represents an overview of the regional housing needs assessment process. So it occurs over a 26-month period. It starts with the HCD regional termination. SCAG then develops a methodology to allocate the units to the jurisdictions. A draft RENA allocation is presented, and then jurisdictions have the opportunity to appeal their draft allocation. The final RENA allocation is finalized, and then the jurisdictions have to update their local housing elements to account for their RENA allocation. Here's an overview of some of the factors and adjustments that are used that impact the total regional termination. How they're applied can have a significant effect on the final RENA number. This is clearly illustrated here on this slide between the 5th and 6th cycles. So in the 5th cycle, vacancy and replacement need was calculated on the difference between existing/projected need and occupied units, while in the 6th cycle, the vacancy, replacement need, and a new overcrowding adjustment was calculated on the existing and projected need. Additionally, a new cost burden adjustment was added, resulting in an overall higher regional determination of 1.3 million, as you can see here. Some of the primary factors that are used in the methodology are the share of household growth, job accessibility, transit accessibility, as well as the social equity adjustment that takes into account various things such as household income and other indicators of resources, as well as education and the economy and so forth. And then this map just illustrates the percentage of jobs that are within a 30-minute commute. The red numbers indicate a higher percentage of jobs within that 30-minute commute. In terms of the appeals process for the 6th cycle, we received 52 appeals, and the most common reasons for appealing the RENA was the lack of vacant land to accommodate housing, the need to preserve community space, and also the focus on more jobs instead of housing. Most appeals requested a reduction in their housing need, and this represented approximately 112,000 units. 4 jurisdictions requested and the other jurisdictions be given additional housing. Out of the 52 appeals received, 2 were granted, and this represented approximately 3,000 units. So the 6th cycle RENA allocation was adopted in March 2021, and this included the redistribution of the successfully appealed 3,000 units. And housing elements, the housing elements deadline for adoption was October of 2021, and as of mid-August, 110 of our jurisdictions have adopted compliant housing elements. I'll now provide you a background on RENA reform. So a number of issues were raised in the 6th cycle. Some of them had to do with the calculation of the regional termination, factors used to determine the housing distribution and the methodology, the role of Connect SoCal in the projections, and a number of other issues were raised. So SCAG had committed to review these issues and facilitate conversations with HCD to reform RENA. So what led to the statewide RENA reform was AB 101, and this required HCD to develop a recommended improved RENA allocation process and methodology that promotes and streamlines housing development and substantially addresses California's housing shortage. And this included a statewide stakeholder participation, and SCAG was at the table for that. The reform also limited to RENA Government Codes 65584 through 655842, and this did not include zoning or housing element issues, though I want to note that we did include some broader issues as part of our letter to HCD. And finally, HCD must submit a report to the legislature by the end of this year. So in terms of SCAG's RENA reform engagement process, we initiated this in 2022 to gather input and feedback from our stakeholders and members of the public. The feedback was reviewed and draft recommendations have been prepared for further public input that we received in June of this year. Our engagement included listening sessions, housing working group presentations, as well as a technical working group presentation, and announcements at RC, CHD, and sub-regional directors meetings, as well as targeted emails to our stakeholders in the region. This is an overview of our RENA reform timeline. So like I said, this year we had our public listening sessions in June of 2023, followed by our recent special CHD meeting that was held in August, where we collected additional feedback on the draft recommendations. And today we're obviously at our regional council meeting. So the next steps, if our recommendations are approved, is to submit a comment later to HCD. And finally, HCD will have to report to the legislature by the end of this year on RENA reform. So, Mr. President, we could pause now for questions or perhaps have questions at the end of our presentation.
Are there any questions at this time? Seeing none, go ahead.
And I'd like to hand it over back to Mayan Johnson.
All right, so if you're ready for the recommendations that we've developed as a result of our stakeholder engagement and our CHD recommendations for this committee. So just how we got to these recommendations. So you have 14 recommendations listed in your staff report. And as I mentioned, they started off with public comments during and after the 6th cycle RENA. And then SCAG reviewed all of the comments received. A lot of them did oppose each other. So we did have to evaluate each of them carefully and make our best professional recommendation for each of the topics raised. And we noticed that there are 4 main themes in the comments received. So we've categorized them into regional determination. So that's the HCD process to give us a regional RENA number. And then there's a methodology process, which is how each COG determines how each jurisdiction gets a RENA allocation. Then there's the appeals process. And then there's things that there's things that are other that don't fit neatly into any of these three categories. So that's how we came up with the 14 recommendations. So then today's presentation of these recommendations to minimize confusion and keep it organized, we've developed it and organized them into the method of action. So some of these were recommended as legislative changes. So these would be things that require a bill or legislative action to change current state housing laws. So we need to codify these recommended changes. And of course, this would affect other COGs statewide as well. For other actions, there's SCAG and or HCD administrative actions. So these wouldn't require a legislative change, but we would refer to HCD to make that administrative change themselves, or it would be SCAG making that change. So it may not be codified, but we may have some flexibility as a COG to implement these changes. And of course, things that SCAG would do would not have to be applied by other COGs. Then there's the 7th cycle RHNA recommendations. So our 7th RHNA cycle, which will probably start we talk about it all the time, but in 2026, we'll officially start that process. And so some of these recommendations are more suited to be decided at the 7th cycle. We can't make decisions on the methodology today because the regional council, that if you're still here to start the 7th cycle, you would be making those decisions then. And because today's decisions aren't binding on the future regional council. But we do recommend that these are forwarded to them when we begin that process. And then finally, it's not an action, but we do have a section of no changes needed or recommended. So I'll also go over those as well. And so to also keep it further organized, we then split them up into the topic area of determination, methodology, appeals, and other or beyond RHNA reform. So let's, again, the action today is to approve the draft staff recommendations on RHNA reform as noted in the staff report and authorize the executive director to submit this comment letter to HCD. And then your packet also includes not just a recommendation attachment that will be part of the letter, but the cover letter that was developed that had a lot of the perspectives shared at HCD. So that will be going as a packet together to HCD. So now going through the actions themselves or the recommendations themselves. So starting with legislative change, things that will require us to go then to the LCMC. These are high level policy concepts. So the details haven't been fully hashed out. So we have certain ideas of them, but we haven't made any recommendations on the details themselves. Again, these are higher level concepts for policy. So the first one is to extend existing need from the regional determination across multiple planning cycles, and then by association, extending the housing element planning periods. Currently, the regional determination represents both existing and projected need. As an earlier slide showed, that is just one regional number rather than parceled out by existing and projected. Our methodology does split the two, but this is asking for HCD to separate then the existing need in that regional determination, and rather assigning that need as well as projected need to the 8-year planning cycle, we're recommending that planning cycle for existing need be extended to, let's say, 12 years. It could be 2 cycles or 1.5 cycles. We haven't fully hashed out the details, but we do recognize the difficulty and challenges of jurisdictions in meeting their total RHNA, let alone the existing need that's been built up over decades, and trying to meet that in 8 years. And so that's our recommendation, but that would need a legislative change because currently it is 8 years. The second one is recommending that procedures be established for HCD to publicize its data, sources, analysis, and methodology. Currently, it does feel like a black box, especially if you're a member of the public who doesn't talk to HCD staff or you're a jurisdiction. We generally don't get much information from HCD for the regional determination process. They do that in consultation with SCAG, the COG, and the California Department of Finance, and SCAG does share whatever information we have as needed to the appropriate elected bodies, to stakeholders, wherever we can. But their data assumptions, they don't publish themselves. The analysis that they have, they don't publish themselves. And all we really see is the final document of the determination at the end. And so there was also an audit conducted by the state auditor. It was concluded in March 22. But for that audit, they did find that HCD needed more vetting of data sources and assumptions that they used in the determination of the COGS that were studied for that exercise. And so we think that this would establish more transparency in the process and more trust by having procedures established and codified in state housing law. Next, we recommend establishing formal processes to review HCD's considerations as part of its regional termination. And we recommend doing this through an advisory panel of experts that would advise HCD on their assumptions, data, and analysis. And again, that's for more transparency purposes and also allowing for other agencies, let's say it's the census or ACS staff, perhaps another COG or a member of academia, but at least advising HCD on the assumptions that they're using just to provide expert professional advice, but it would still be up to HCD for the determination. The next one is to establish additional due process opportunities for housing need determination with defined grounds on which COGS and jurisdictions can appeal methodology assumptions. So currently, once we get, state law allows for the COG to appeal a regional determination, and SCAG did take advantage of this during the last cycle. HCD did reduce our RENA by 3,000 units, but they did not reduce it any further than that, and there were no other recourses spelled out in state housing law. And jurisdictions cannot currently appeal that number as well. And so based out of the CEHD conversation, we recommend adding this as a recommendation in legislation. Next, we recommend codifying an earlier date, which is currently at least 26 months before a housing element due date, for HCD to provide the regional determination to a COG. Currently, it's they can provide the regional number no later than 26 months before that due date. But what this does, HCD did wait until the last due date for this number, but there are a lot of options that we can exercise in the RENA process. For example, extending the appeals process, maybe taking more time in the methodology to make it meaningful, but we couldn't exercise or extend our time because we ran up against the deadline for this 26 months. And so this would allow us to have a more meaningful process and to have more stakeholder engagement and consider a lot of other factors as well. So we do recommend codifying an earlier date, whether that's 30 months, 36 months. We haven't gotten that far in detail, but we recommend we recommend an earlier date. And then for other, we also recommend reinstating trade and transfer option of RENA. So it also furthers objectives such as AFFH. So trade and transfer is the option for two jurisdictions to transfer RENA units, draft allocation between them with an agreement, and presumably there are resources exchanged. This used to be in state housing law, but was removed for the 6th cycle. And the reason for removal, it's generally stated it's about they wanted to avoid higher income jurisdictions shirking their responsibilities for housing and dumping it on lower income jurisdictions. And so in the interest of AFFH, this was removed from state housing law. A lot of jurisdictions do want the option to be able to do this, although for the fourth and fifth cycles, there was talk about trade and transfer. No one exercised it, but they still want the option there. And so SCAG recommends bringing that back, but having guardrails in place, such as ensuring that AFFH is considered. It could be limiting it only to above market units. It could be just limiting it to disadvantaged communities. The details we haven't hashed out at this time, but we do recommend bringing it back. So then going on to SCAG and HCD administrative changes. Again, this would not require legislation, but rather allowing for the flexibility of the COG or HCD to do these things. So for SCAG, we recommend facilitating conversations, ensuring that the determination process considers all available data at the time, including remote work. So this again would not be codified, but rather making sure that HCD has all the up-to-date information available. And of course, that ties into the transparency and procedures we hope to be established. We also want to exercise the option of additional time for the appeals process, but of course, currently we can extend it by 30 days, but we can't exercise the option if they give it to the determination to us at exactly 26 months. So this is in conjunction with our other recommendations. For other category, we also want to inquire if the state has considered RENA allocation to be one of the considerations for housing funding opportunities. I want to point out that in our REAP 1 and 2 programs, we actually do tie RENA allocation to how we allocate funds for certain types of projects, namely for our subregions to help jurisdictions meet their 6-cycle RENA. But at the state level, currently HCD grants and funding opportunities don't consider arena allocations. So we're asking HCD to include arena allocation as one of the considerations to qualify for funding or to be competitive. And then we also recommend that we provide jurisdictions more time between the issuance of the RENA allocation and housing element adoption deadline. There's about 1 year in between. That's the intention of state housing law, but we do recommend in conjunction with an earlier determination that we can give more time to jurisdictions if we had more time in the process overall. So we recommend this as well. So 7-cycle RENA change. These are for issues that we see as more appropriate being decided during the 7th RENA cycle. For the determination process, we want to ensure that the determination process by HCD, again, considers all available data sources. We don't know what's going to be exactly available for the 7th cycle, but we want to continue ensuring that HCD does that at that time. For the methodology, for brevity's sake, the full listing is in your staff report, but we want to consider different distribution methodologies, assumptions, and factors as part of the 7th cycle RENA. Each COG can decide their own methodology, what factors are in them, and they could differ from cycle to cycle and COG to COG. So we have issues that were raised, such as the presence of a university should definitely be emphasized. We have things such as job access should be reconsidered, how transit factors into housing allocation, a whole host of issues that were recommended to be looked at. And again, the full listing is in your report, but we do recommend for the 7th cycle, the decision makers to consider those factors. But if we decide now, it would not be binding. So we recommend forwarding those on. And then for the appeals process, we do understand that there's a lot of frustration, lack of resources available to file an appeals. So we will explore preparing a guidebook or other materials to help appellants in the appeals process. And then beyond RENA, the last recommendation is that we request HCD review housing element law, so beyond RENA, to address challenges to housing building and production. Because as Kame mentioned, RENA isn't just a number, it's supposed to represent housing need. And as local jurisdictions in your housing element, you need to demonstrate where this will occur. And there are a lot of constraints to show these sites and programs that can meet housing need. And we do want this to be looked at further. And so we're asking HCD not just to look at housing or RENA reform, but also the next step of housing element reform. So now going into additional comments that we did not recommend for action. These two are no action needed. The distribution of RENA should ensure higher income jurisdictions receive their fair share of housing need. We are committed to this. This isn't state housing law, so no action is needed. We very much agree with the statement. And then the appeals process should be meaningful and not perfunctory. And we agree with this as well. And that's why we recommend a lot of these issues. So for example, the methodology, how we approach the methodology. We do want to make sure the methodology and its application are meaningful, but that we do consider individual circumstances as they come up in the appeals process. So no action recommended or needed there. For actions that we don't recommend, these are additional comments. On the determination process, the determination, it should include additional assumptions and factors such as populations and institutions, market factors, land available for capacity for development, and prior housing production. So the reasons are varied why we don't recommend these being in the determination, but they do focus on, for example, if the capacity of meeting need versus how much need there is in a jurisdiction, because the capacity to meet the need doesn't always influence the need itself. And so we don't agree that that should be a part of the determination process, but rather on the housing element end, we need to help our jurisdictions meet that need that they have independent from current land available. And then also prior housing production, rather than looking at how many permits are issued, because it does vary by jurisdiction, the circumstances are different. We feel that existing housing need can be measured by things such as overcrowding, cost burden households, rather than just permits issued. And so we don't recommend that as a determination factor. For the methodology, the RENA methodology, the comments were the RENA methodology should consider factors such as land unavailable for development or available sites and areas that fall within the Coastal Commission as being excluded from the methodology. Again, similar to the determination, the reasoning above that I just mentioned, we don't agree with that either because it doesn't necessarily mean that the jurisdiction cannot zone for housing in the rest of the jurisdiction. It may be constraints in that area. And then it is also unknown whether the Coastal Commission would disapprove that. And so we wouldn't know at the time of the methodology if that is completely excluded. And so we do recommend that jurisdictions look at other types of tools, such as affordable housing overlays, increased density, mixed use, on how to accommodate need in areas outside of planning constraints. No change is recommended on the RENA allocation to remain more in line with Connect SoCal growth estimates and the methodology completely aligned with Connect SoCal goals. The Connect SoCal plan, which you just heard at the JPC, you notice that there's a lot more objectives and goals of Connect SoCal that are different from what's spelled out in state housing law. And so while they are required to be consistent with the development pattern of the SCS, the RENA allocation we see has more flexibility on what it's trying to accomplish, that is meeting our housing need in the region. So we don't recommend a change there. And that the preservation of existing units should be considered as a factor in the distribution methodology. We don't recommend that change there because jurisdictions can receive credit for their preservation of units up to 25% of a RENA allocation in their housing elements. So from that end, they do get credit, and we don't think that should reduce a jurisdiction's number. And then finally, additional comments, no action recommended. The appeals process should not allow for jurisdictions to appeal the allocation of other jurisdictions. We had 52 appeals filed on RENA allocations, and 4 of them were appealed on a different city. Most asked for reduction, but the 4 cities wanted to add units to that one particular city. And so we wanted to ensure that there is due process, that you don't just appeal your jurisdiction. If you feel something is amiss or incorrect application of the methodology, we do want due process. So even though it's more work for us, we still want due process. So we don't recommend a change there. The basis for appeal should not be expanded. Currently, there are 3 ways to appeal a RENA, 3 reasons to appeal a RENA application of methodology, a planning factor, constraint listed in state housing law, and a change of circumstance. We think that those 3 do cover enough. So we don't think there should be any expansion or reduction in those 3. And then successfully appealed units should not have to be redistributed back to the region. One reason for this that we don't agree with this recommendation is that regional housing needs assessment, the R stands for regional. And so if you reduce housing need in one area, it doesn't necessarily reduce our regional housing need. It does have to go somewhere because that is either projected or existing housing need. And so we don't recommend we don't recommend not doing a redistribution because it is a regional housing number we need to meet. And then subregional delegation is inconsistent with the goals of RENA. We don't recommend any change of removing that. Subregional delegation is an option for 2 or more jurisdictions that are geographically contiguous. It doesn't have to be our currently formed COGs like OCOG or WRCOG, but it could just be 2 or more jurisdictions that want to form a subregion. In those cases, they agree to this delegation, and then SCAG gives them a subregional number based on the regional determination. So a part of that, and then they come up with their own methodology, conduct their own appeals process, and whatever they determine at the end, the distribution, they do have to meet state housing law, but SCAG accepts that and folds that back into the final RENA allocation. But we think that this allows for flexibility of jurisdictions who want their own methodology, who want to develop their own, a form of trade and transfer, if you will, but we want to ensure that that flexibility option is still there. And then finally, an audit should be performed on SCAG's 6-cycle regional determination. We don't agree with this because we think that if audited, SCAG was not selected as one of the regions studied, but we think that the results would be the same. So rather than focusing on an audit, we want to focus on ensuring that there's RENA reform based on these. And we think that increasing transparency, that there's more trust in the process, more objectivity can help the process, help the trust in the process, and remain fair and transparent. So considering all of those, our next steps, based on the actions of today, if the recommendations are approved, we will submit the comment letter with the recommendations to HCD to make sure that we meet their September 15th deadline. And then we will watch for HCD's report on legislative reform. And so we will update this committee and other decision makers on an as needed basis. Thank you.
I get it yet. Thank you. Okay. I'll now entertain comments from members of the RC. Just a reminder, though, if a member of the body is attending remotely but not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public but not participate in any member discussions or voting by this body. We'll now start with with comments from the regional council members. Those in person first, then remote locations, and virtually with raised hands.
Mr. President, you have Margaret Clark, followed by immediate past President Jen Harnick.
Okay.
I was just wondering, is there any reason why we wouldn't want to add what Councilmember John Marish said to the item, including judicial review to ensure timelines and accountability during the housing element review process with the ability to pursue the legal process? I think that's what he was asking. Is there any reason why we wouldn't want to do that?
I'd like Kome to answer that one.
Thanks, Mayan. If I understand the question, this is about the judicial review
Yes.
that was mentioned earlier on. As a body, we feel very strongly that we are in litigation based on some of that. And so we would be basically going against our own judicial basis. So now cities are welcome to have that opinion and can move. And we have no objection to any city or member city having that impression.
So we do have the ability to sue right now, is what you're saying.
We are in court. We're being
Yeah,
sued
okay.
right now. So we don't
Okay.
feel like we have an exposure.
There is just
So
one
this
little-
is more of this. If we have to talk more about this, we have to be in closed session. So I just want to
Oh, got it.
quickly
Okay,
put
I
that
just
out
wanted
there.
to see if we considered what he said. There is one little typo there that I can tell you later.
Please.
I was a teacher, so.
Oh, okay, sure.
I can show it to you if you want.
Okay.
It's just changed in the middle, but may struggle do.
I'm
It
sorry,
should
what
be
page?
two. Oh, it's on page 25, the letter, the actual
Okay.
letter. It says may struggle do, D-O, it should be T-O.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to call on immediate past President Jen Harnick or Lauren Meister. Lauren Meister.
Yep, thank you. So as you know, I'm from a very small city, at least in terms of size. We're 1.9 square miles, but we have 36,000 residents, so we are 18,000 per square mile. And so when I look at the formula and look at the comments, I really think we have to put more emphasis on the fact that to have this one size fits all formula and not consider existing density and the fact that some cities are built out, what it's creating is more displacement of existing residents. So I would like to bring up that point. I think land availability is an issue. I think whether a city is rent stabilized or not should be part of the formula. For example, in West Hollywood, we had rent stabilization ordinance for many years. And so we have 80% renters in our city, and many of them are under the rent stabilization ordinance. And when you start tearing down those buildings, it changes the whole dynamic. of rent stabilization. The other issue I wanted to bring up is that I think that the state, whether it's HCD or someone else at the state level, before they start putting together these formulas to see how many units are needed, that they give us a report on short-term rentals and how many short-term rentals are being taking away permanent housing in our state. You look at state laws, none of our state laws on housing talk about permanence, that they should not be used for short-term rentals, that they should be used for permanent housing, people who want to live here, not vacation here, who could be using our hotels. And I think that that short-term rentals are taking away, permanent housing from residents who want to live here at an affordable rate. The other issue is the due process issue. I think we do have to speak a little stronger about the due process opportunities. I understand the situation that we're in. However, then at least we should say that the due process opportunities have to include a neutral party. Because what we have is HCD coming up with the formula, coming up with the rules, and then they're the body that has oversight over the appeal. So where is that not a conflict of interest, that they're not a neutral party? So I think we have to say something about a neutral panel being the panel that oversees the RHNA appeals. And then I think in terms of other, HCD, I know for many cities, has micromanaged the housing element process. I mean, we showed that we were able to, have whatever number of units we were required to have. And that housing element came back to us at least 2 or 3 times because they're listening to special interests who didn't like the way we were deciding how we were going to get to those units. To me, that's micromanaging. That's why it took so long. And now we have project applications for builder's remedy because HCD could not get us back the housing element within a timely fashion. And so I think that's another issue, is that if they want us to stick to deadlines and timelines, then so do they. They need to also be held accountable. The other issue is that HCD required sites to be a certain size. So here we are, a built-out city, and it has to have X number of acreage to have X number of affordable units. Again, trying to tell us how to provide the units that we have figured out how to at least show for where they would go, and HCD is not satisfied with that when they know nothing about our city. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, and it is in reference to the sub-regional delegations as well as to the trade and transfer. Would those options be available at any point and throughout the RHNA cycle?
So currently, sub-regional delegation is only offered towards the beginning of the cycle, and there is a deadline. I believe it's jurisdictions wanting to do that have to form one no earlier than 28 months, I believe. And so that the timing of that is also odd because it comes before the regional determination number. There may be some ways to, maybe you don't have to sign on the dotted line until later, or you can just rescind it, but there are some limitations on when you can form that. And then for our recommendation to bring back trade and transfer, we don't prescribe whether that should apply to the draft allocation or not. So we are flexible in how we craft the details of when we can do that.
Okay, thank you. And looking at both of those options, it just seems to me that things are changing so rapidly that to have that opportunity throughout the period serves those in need of housing in the very best way and the communities in needs of housing. So I think it's worth looking at the trade and transfer. You might not recognize the need or the opportunity at the beginning of the cycle, maybe halfway through, you have great opportunity for it. And that also goes for when we talk about the sub-region opportunity. So I think it's worth looking at. Things change and we want to make sure that we get the housing built. Thank you.
Mr. President, you also have Damon Alexander as well as Silly Sara and Jenny Crosswhite.
Thank you, and nice report. This is my first time with this arena. What is the trade and transfer? Because I'm thinking sports, so if you can help me out with that.
It's not as fun. But a trade and transfer for RENA in the past, once you received your draft RENA allocation, you could find another jurisdiction. You could presumably they trade funds or resources, but the jurisdiction can trade out RENA units or receive RENA units from another jurisdiction. And then they would let SCAG know as long as it complies with state housing law, then SCAG would take that number and
Okay.
include it in the final RENA.
Okay, good, great. And you said that you were on the appeals, you were developing a guidebook. Do you know when that's going to come out?
Sure. So we will probably we'll develop it for the 7th RENA cycle because things can change. There may be laws passed that will change the appeals process, but we are exploring ways to help jurisdictions appeal RENA numbers. So we'll have materials available. Just what that looks like, we don't know right now.
And your sub-regional delegations, are there any information as of this writing?
Not that I know of. So for the 6th cycle, we did go around, I hopped in my RENA mobile and went around the region advertising sub-regional delegation, but there were no takers. We did even offer financial compensation because there is work involved for staff or for their staff. But right now, I don't know of any that really that have talked about taking the 7th cycle sub-regional delegation, but we'll certainly have that option available if it's still in state housing law.
What are the benefits?
Yeah, so the benefits are that the sub-region would be able to come up with their own methodology. So if there's certain planning constraints or they don't want to do a formula basis that they think SCAG would do, they would do their own methodology process and assign to their jurisdictions their own RENA allocations. And then they would conduct their own appeals process. So if they wanted to be a neutral party to hear appeals, they could do that theoretically. So it's basically more control of the RENA process at a local level. And then as long as they're in compliance with state housing law, they do have to follow everything that SCAG does for housing law. But once that's completed, they give SCAG their RENA allocation and we take that as final.
So I could change my numbers?
You could have more control over your numbers. I don't know if I'd classify it as change, but you would have to also agree with all your local jurisdictional friends.
Okay, thank you.
Silly Sara.
This one doesn't work actually, but yes, so they're both working. So I wanted to follow up with that around the trade and transfer. When you say as long as it follows, it's following its compliancy around housing elements, right? When you're saying more control over the number, does that mean you can decrease your affordable unit numbers and increase your market numbers?
So for the trade and transfer option would be that we would propose, although again, we haven't really discussed details, but currently we could add guardrails such as it would be limited to only market rate units to ensure that a higher income jurisdiction or high resource jurisdiction isn't just trading out its lower income need. And so there'd be guardrails such as that in order to ensure that everyone does their fair share of housing.
And when you say the guardrails, I think that as a large city, one of our concern is that using this option would allow cities to move their affordable housing unit requirement somewhere else. So is that the guardrail you're specifically speaking of, is that they will still need to some extent meet some affordable unit numbers versus saying they just don't want to do it at all?
Yes, we definitely want to make sure everyone does their fair share. So if they just trade out, for example, their market rate units, that may not be a problem for AFFH.
Okay.
And of course, that's just one example.
Jenny Crosswhite.
First, a comment, I think on the trade and transfer, the devil is in the details. and kind of how that gets worked out. And because I think that's traditionally has been the concern is that, you end up with one community that's all affordable housing and another community that has none. And so kind of how that works out. But my bigger comment was on the beyond RENA. So if we are going to submit, is there going to be a larger conversation at some point about the housing element, or as the previous speaker brought up, is this the sort of the time we're going to put that in? Because I know that our city, I think we've submitted 4 times. Most of our times that has come back has been strictly technical, not substantive changes. And so we've had affordable housing units that have been sitting around for 2 years, unable to get funding. You're at the risk of losing the development community because we can't get our housing element approved by, so I'm just wondering, if that's a conversation for part of this, or if that's another conversation that we'll have at some point, because I know that when we were up doing our advocacy at the state, we had asked about there being a provision that they would pass legislation or something so that affordable housing wouldn't be held up, assuming the city was diligently working towards getting their housing element approved. And the response that we got was, well, that would be great, but by the time we get it approved, your housing element should be approved anyway, right? Because of how long it takes to get a bill through. So I'm just wondering if this is the time for that conversation, or if that's another conversation we'll be having.
Yeah, it would be the latter. And we do understand there is a lot of frustration. So right now, HCD's focus is just on RENA reform. And so the recommendations are to make a comment, or we would be putting them in a comment letter to HC for their efforts. But SCAG, we are looking at ways to evaluate housing element reform. But we would be asking in this instance for HCD to also do a statewide one, so then we can also then submit it rather than it's just a standalone comment without a process.
Okay. I was only asking since we'd had the beyond RENA, we'd had that one bullet point. And so I was just wondering if we were going to add bullet points, or if we were going to.
It was just the overall concept of look at housing element reform.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. President, if there are no additional comments in the room, I'll proceed to call members via Zoom. So Zoom. Online, Wendy Bucknam.
Thank you. Well, I thank you so much for this great presentation, a summary of our very busy and robust meeting in August. And I appreciate all your hard work, Mayan. As usual, you do great work, and I love the way you present information. Just one quick comment. I agree with several things that have been stated, and especially with John Marsh. We had several robust discussions on this matter, in which HCD conducted its sounding board process to obtain input and recommendations on statewide RENA reform. And we did request that these concerns be addressed in the transmittal letter to HCD during our meeting. So that transparency, I don't see it noted, and I'm hoping that was just an oversight. So if you could maybe correct that omission, and have the letter be revised to include those comments on this matter potentially.
Yes, that was inadvertently excluded from the letter, and I'm glad you brought that up. We will make sure that the concerns expressed by CEHD and their frustrations are included in that letter.
Yes, and then finally, I would just say I think there does need to be a process on holding HCD accountable when look, the Orange County Council of Governments is in the process of trying to force this issue about what the original numbers were, and we're being stopped, and because there's not a basis in law. I'm not a legal person, but I'm summarizing this because it's in process right now. And I just want to say that we have to address this legislatively, and I'm not going to let it go. Thank you.
Mr. President, there are no further raised hands.
Okay.
I'm a late raised hand, Mr. President, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I just want to a little bit of commentary before I move the motion. This process has been frustrating for all the local jurisdictions. It's been around for a long time. We all realize that it is very frustrating. If you look at the numbers, you take the last two cycles and this cycle is more than the last two cycles combined. So everyone's frustration is very much heard and noted. I would say this is what happens when we don't hold our state legislators accountable. As a unit, SCAG will make these letter go out there and we are powerful as SCAG. But as individuals, you all have relationships with your state legislators and you need to go knock on their door. I will say for my 6 years I spent up there, I didn't get a lot of input. A few of my friends did. I represented, I think, 11 cities at the time. I very rarely heard from anybody. So it's our duty to go knock on those doors. It's our duties to build those relationships when they're back at home and express your frustration directly to them. So hopefully avoid some of this stuff in the future because more and more Sacramento is taking away local control from jurisdictions. And that's not what our residents want. Saying that commentary, I want to commend the staff for writing a very good letter, going through a very good process of doing what we can to make sure that we hopefully have more say in the future allocation of RENA in the process going forward. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for your efforts in putting that together. And with that, in the interest of time, Mr. President, I'd like to move item 1 and the consent 2 through 10, if that's possible from our council.
Who seconded?
Salacha Linwood.
Okay, before we do that, I have to ask, any public comment on the consent calendar?
Not seeing any raised hands in person or on Zoom, Mr.
Okay.
President.
Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
And Mr. President, I just want to confirm that it's the whole consent calendar, which includes
Yes.
receiving files.
12 are receiving file.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, 1 to 12.
Right.
Thank you. Damon Alexander,
Aye.
Cindy Allen. Aye. Valeria Mezcua. Adele Andrade Stadler,
Yes.
Constantine Anthony, Catherine Barger, Elizabeth Becerra, Gary Boyer,
Yes.
Art Brown,
Aye.
Wendy Bucknam,
Aye.
Margaret Clark, Jenny Crosswhite,
Yes.
Rick Dennison, Jonathan Dimitru, Keith
Aye.
Ike.
Yes. Dimitri's, yes.
Thank you so much. Margaret Finley, John Gabbard,
Yes.
James Gaisley,
Paisley, aye.
Brian Goodell,
Goodell, aye.
Marshall Goodman,
Aye.
Kurt Hagman, Jan Harnick,
Yes.
Mark Henderson,
Yes.
Laura Hernandez.
Yes.
Mike Judge,
Yes.
Joe Kalmick,
Yes.
Trish Kelly,
Yes.
Kathleen Kelly,
Yes.
Tammy Kim,
Boy.
Lauren Clayman, Linda Krupa,
Yes.
Patricia Lock Dawson,
Aye.
Vianney Lopez,
Yes.
Clint Lorimore,
Aye.
Steve Manos,
Yes.
Ray Marquez,
Yes.
Casey McKeon,
Aye.
Lauren Meister,
Aye.
Dennis Michael, Maricela Nava,
Yes.
Maria Nava Fraulet,
Yes.
Frank Navarro, Frank Navarro, thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Oscar Ortiz,
Yes.
Luis Blancarte,
La carta, yes.
Gail Rebollar,
Yes.
Rocky Rhodes,
Yes.
Deborah Robertson, Celeste Rodriguez,
Yes.
Tim Sandoval,
Yes.
Suli Sorrow.
Robertson, yes.
Aye.
Sorry.
Noted, thank you.
Robertson, yes.
Thank you. Suli Sorrow is a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Zach Schwank,
Yes.
David Shapiro,
Yes.
Marty Siminoff,
Yes.
Jose Luis Solache,
Yes.
Hilda Solis, Donald Wagner,
Wagner, aye.
Alan Wapner,
Yes.
Jeff Wood,
Aye.
Frank Yokoyama, Frank Yokoyama. Mr. President, the motion for item 1 in the consent calendar passes with 48 votes yes, 0 votes no, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you very much. Now I'll call on Lucy Dunn, Regional Council Member for the Business Representative Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, everybody. I'm in the beautiful city of Mission Viejo today. In the interest of time, some very, very quick notes for you. The business report is on page 325 of your agenda packet. Some really interesting issues the business community is struggling with right now, and it's kind of encapsulated in a quote by Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell, who says, "We are navigating by the stars under cloudy skies." So the economic data that you're all getting right now is really just conflicting at times. But in order to control inflation, of course, we know that the feds have been raising interest rates. It's anybody's guess if they will raise it again. But I wanted to really help cities by just bringing to your attention some real key points. And Randall Lewis really tipped me off to some of these. Look at project postponements in your cities. Because credit is so tight right now, those projects, if they're not moving forward, they might be struggling because of the credit situation with our sector. Watch your taxes and fees. They're driving business to really slow down. And interesting, in a BizFed pulse poll, which I shared with you on page 333 of the agenda packet, regulations, fees, and crime have taken the 1 and 2 slots from homelessness. So you need those businesses to expand to increase revenue in tough times. So watch that one. The office sector is still flat. It's affecting restaurants and businesses near offices, especially as people aren't necessarily coming back to work 5 days a week. Plus, cities really pay attention to those offices that are vacant. Will they have to be given back to the banks? Will they have to be reappraised? Get creative in thinking about what that might mean for your revenue in your towns as properties are starting to get reappraised. So just some quick notes for cities to look at, and I've got a lot of information in those 4 pages of the business report. Last but not least, in the interest of time, just thank you for the policy committees and SCAG staff report on the draft Connect SoCal, the GLUE Council, which is your global land use and economics, your business group. They're going to get a preview presentation of this as well on October 2nd. We love when any of you can join us on Zoom to hear the business community's response to the tough issues that you're all dealing with here. And hopefully we'll have some good comments and to make it as robust and moving forward in good planning as possible. So that, in the interest of time again, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, quick shout out to our colleague and Regional Council Member Drew Boyles of El Segundo. Their Little League team won the Little League World Series last month, so congratulations. Is he here by any chance?
I'm on.
Nope.
I'm on the call. Thank you so much. We got a big parade. Big parade this Sunday at 12. So come to El Segundo.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the demographic and SCAG's 34th annual demographic workshop is just around the corner on September 20th. The event will be held here in the SCAG main office in downtown LA with online option for virtual viewing. In-person tickets are free for elected officials and city managers in the region. Program features expert discussions how generational dynamics are influencing change in Southern California's demographic landscape and implications for housing, transportation, and sustainability. Please register at scag.ca.gov/demographics. The EAC work plan and chairs briefing on June 1st. I convene a strategic planning session to establish high-level priorities for the year and to integrate SCAG strategic plan update. Results of the strategic planning is an EAC work plan, which engages regional council more deeply in setting priorities for SCAG policy, leadership, and programs, and provides direction to staff to prioritize and plan agenda items across policy committees in coordination with the regional council. I want to thank you to our policy committee chairs and vice chairs for meeting with SCAG leadership this summer to discuss my focus on my priority areas for consistency across our committees. A final work plan will be provided to the regional council at its October meeting. District evaluations. Every 5 years, SCAG bylaws require the boundaries of each district be reviewed based on city population. Districts should have a geographic community of interest and be approximately equal population. This review conducted through the district evaluation process. The district evaluation subcommittee will begin meeting in October, Marty. If you wish to be considered to be part of the committee, please contact Board Clerk Maggie Aguilar by September 15th. And while the regional council was dark last month, we continued our work to coordinate collaboration and advocate for our region. In July, SCAG met with the Arroyo Verdugo Communities Joint Powers Authority to discuss streamlining grant execution, the vehicle miles traveled regional model threshold, and interagency communications. We also had the pleasure of meeting with California State Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas and the newly appointed chair of the Assembly Local Government Committee, as well as former SCAG council. I'll get it right yet. Regional Council Member, Assembly Member Juan Carrillo. In this meeting, we shared our legislative and budgetary priorities, including support for ongoing investments in active transportation and infill infrastructure grant programs, as well as regional early action planning 2.0 program. We also joined the LA County Business Federation to advocate for regional priorities. Sacramento, SCAG met with 8 legislative officers, including Assemblymember Carrillo and Blanco Rubio. Next regional council meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 5th at 12 noon. And I'll go on to the executive director's report.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. President. I have 3 quick items, maybe 3.5 items. I just want to take a moment again to thank the members of the JPC who earlier this morning approved to submit to the regional council the Connect SoCal 2024 with the recommendation to let us release for public review. As I promised Supervisor Spiegel earlier on, it's going to be a robust review process. We're taking extra time. We expect that if we do get the regional council's approval to release the draft in November, we will be able to put the plan out with a subsequent release of the program environmental impact report within 30 days of the plan release for up to a 60-day review. During the public review and comment period, we will hold 3 public hearings and host an informational meeting in each county to brief elected officials on the elements of the plan. And so what you heard today will probably have a little bit more information, especially in smaller groups, to be able to get to more granular detail if necessary with those briefings with elected officials on the elements of the plan. We intend to also exceed the 45-day comment period requirement and allow for a 60-day comment period for the program environmental impact report, thus ending our review process, the public review process, in January, on the 12th of January, 2024. At the conclusion of the comment period, SCAG staff will respond to all the comments as required and make all the necessary adjustments and updates to the plan before presenting the final plan to the regional council for adoption in April of 2024. Also earlier today, the regional council took action under consent item 6 to approve updates to the RUSH program, the PATH program, which if you recall, I'm just going to quickly take a step back. If you recall, we have the REAP 2.0 program that has $246 million. And all of this money has been pushed out to our regional, our member agencies and our sub-regional agencies. The $246 million is broken into 5 programs. 3 of those programs are dedicated to housing and housing production. The last of the housing production elements is the RUSH program. The Regional Utility Supporting Housing is the full name that we call RUSH Pilot Program. It's a $35 million program that we are expecting to be released and go out. And looking for dates here, Sarah. I think it goes out on September 11th. Because of the approval today, it will go out the call for projects will go out on September 11th, and the call will be open until November 6th, which allows member agencies again to apply. The tweak that the program had already been approved by the Regional Council earlier on, but we also had some extensive industry workshop and advisory panel of experts input that allowed us to reshape it and focus on just public agencies, cities and counties as eligible applicants to the project. So we also expect to hold an application workshop in October so that we have more time available to applicants to come in and have questions answered. And staff will also, Elizabeth has promised that staff will have office hours available for member agencies that have even more detailed questions that they want to ask. So we will make ourselves available to be sure that everybody that wants to apply for this program gets a chance to apply for the program. And there's more information online if you need more information on this program. The Green Print tool, TAC, the second meeting of that TAC committee, the Technical Advisory Committee on the Green Print tool, took place on August 28th and included discussion on potential draft data standards for identifying and evaluating and selecting data elements for the tool. This work supports the TAC's purpose of ensuring the future SoCal Green Print tool is aligned with policy objectives that are already identified and adopted by the Regional Council in the Regional Advanced Mitigation Planning Policy Framework. The final TAC meeting is scheduled for September 25th with a discussion of revisions to the draft tool standards, tool functionality, and beta testing. When all of this is done, we expect to have the Green Print tool taken to the Energy and Environment Committee for their consideration in November, and ultimately back to the Regional Council in January for their approval. And then last, I just want to quickly celebrate the fact that we just got our redesignation approved by the Clean Cities Coalition designation team out of the Department of Energy. We had the privilege of being joined by Second Vice President Cindy Allen, immediate past President Jan Harnick, and Regional Council member Oscar Ortiz. They attended and shared their individual perspectives on the Clean Cities program and had some very unique examples of how this relates to what's happening on the ground in their cities. And we had a chance to also present our program region-wide. And with that, with those presentations, we think we were able to secure a redesignation. For those who are not familiar with the Clean Cities designation, there are regions across the country that are designated as Clean Cities coalition areas, about 75 of them, and it allows us opportunity to grants and technical assistance from the Department of Energy and the federal government to do things that allow us to enable our member agencies to invest in clean mobility options and clean fuel options. With that, Mr. President, I will conclude my remarks and see if there are any questions.
Any questions? Yes. Turn on your mic.
The time is the demographic workshop.
starts at 9 a.m., but there are breakfast reception and everything at 8:30. That would be Wednesday, September 20th, 13 days from now.
And it ends at what time?
Approximately 3 p.m.
Thank you.
Okay, any future agenda items? Any announcements? Want to thank you all for your participation. This meeting is now adjourned. Still got done before.